Welcome to the Dreaming Wild, where we invite the unseen to dwell in us and guide us deeper. I'm Dani West, somatic dreamworker and your host. In a world drunk on urgency and careening into chaos, we gather to ritualize slowness, rewild our psyche, incubate the imaginal, and root into the animate forces that shape our lives. By doing so, we make more room for magic to land in our bones and in our world. Turns out we could use a little magic these days. Today's guest is Akka, weaver of words, collector of whims, and lover of the woods. She draws from a deep well of lived experience and her innate sensitivity to the unseen and unsaid. A poet, public speaker, event producer, photographer, blogger, copywriter, mom, medium, and muse. Akka has been featured at literary and music festivals, art openings, fundraisers, private events, and TEDx talks. This episode is all about finding inspiration, navigating challenges, and ultimately owning your magic. We go deep into the creative process, the symbolic lens, synchronicity, and the guidance that arises when we notice the signs that life puts in our path. We lean into grief alchemy and how the intensity of loss can really teach us about our own authenticity, leading us through dark times into a place of renewal. If you're loving the show, come join our community over at thedreamingwild.com, where I host monthly meetups for dream work, poetry, and musing. Thank you so much for sharing, subscribing, and boosting our reach. The Dreaming Wild wouldn't exist without the direct support of this amazing community. And now onto our episode, Creativity, the Symbolic Lens, and Grief Alchemy.
If you can relate to the color of dirt at sunset, or the taste of air under the dampened moon, if you can fall into a body of water and shed a tear for the endless work of waves or the tireless pursuit of wind, then you are a poet. If you pause when sun slips behind a winter cloud or laugh at the rope you swore was a snake, if your heart leaps and your stomach falls for any reason whatsoever or no reason, then you are a poet. If you have ever wondered how your skin came to be your skin, or your brain, your mind, your eyes, your sight, your wounds, your gift, then you are a poet. Better yet, you are a poem.
Ugh. My body is electric. Wow. Wow. Akka, such an honor to welcome you into this space, and what a powerful entry point that you've offered us all here. This piece is such an invitation.
Yeah, I wrote that years ago, over a decade ago. I'm sure it's been over a decade. And it's kind of followed me. A lot of my work does not. I write and then I forget about it. It kind of just goes. I rarely pull from archives. But this one, I think in my work through the years, a big piece of what I've done, or what I like to do, is write to the writers inside of everybody, the poets, the artists, the creators. And so a big part of my offering, whether it's verbalized or not, but it's the intent that I hold, is to offer permission and offer like recognition that we all carry this. Because one thing I've heard over and over again, when people give me feedback, whether it's, at a live reading or, because of stuff I've published online or whatever, it's like I hear so many times, oh, that was so beautiful. That was so wonderful. Oh, I wish I could write like you could. Oh, I can't write that way. I wish I could. I mean, it's just, anybody who performs and has shared their work publicly, I think it's a universal, you get that feedback. You hear that from people. And to me, there's something heartbreaking about it. And familiar, totally familiar, because that's where I was before I just decided to do it anyway.
Yeah. This piece, as you're speaking to it, the image comes to mind for me of, watering the seeds, some of them laying dormant, perhaps some of them only slightly sprouted, but just generously and tenderly offering the water to help bring the life forward that is actually already there inside of us all.
Exactly.
And opening the space and making the room for people to really root into that. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the best possible thing I can hear is somebody says, hearing your words made me go home and write my own. Mm-hmm. That's just like that. And then when people cry,
yeah.
When I see tears, then it's like, yes, my job here is done.
Yeah.
But mostly that feedback of like, it made me want to write. And then it made me actually write. I started writing, and I haven't done that in 10 years or 20 years or since college or, mm-hmm. I forgot about that. I forgot about that part of myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a call in that piece, and it's calling to a very deep place. When people cry, obviously they're being moved at a very deep level. And I wonder, that call, you are a poet, and as you're teasing that out in the listener, how would you describe that space that you're speaking into in them, the poet in them? What is that seed that lays in us all?
It's the part of us that sees with our heart and has the ability to see with the heart through the lens of the heart and relate almost more like an animal relates to its environment, or a child. I mean, to me, poetry is, it's like if you take language as a body, as this vehicle that we all use to communicate, and, the way we distill plants down to their essence, and you extract the perfume or the medicine from the plant. It's the same way, a poet will extract the medicine from language, and it then has the capacity to transcend language, because language can actually be limiting. It's a practice in simplifying our relationship to ourselves and simplifying the lens through which we see, so that we can really narrow down to the heart of what's before us, whether that's something very just visual and in nature, or if it's something very complex and in our life that we're gnawing through. It just helps us pull the flesh off and get to the real bones of something. The gift of poetry, one of them is it's skinning the bones. It's stripping back what's unnecessary to find what's true.
even the structure of poetry does that
Yeah,
by stripping away all the extra words and the grammar, and goes right to even the actual modality is that.
I'm just going to speak to what pops in.
Yeah.
And what I saw was sitting in meditation. So and I didn't expect to go this way, but it's like when you close your eyes, and sometimes it takes a long time to drop in. It's like there's a lot of, our daily thoughts. We're reviewing our day, we're reviewing our week, we're reviewing our life, and that's all and sometimes it creates this just restlessness, like how long do I have to sit here until something happens?
Mm-hmm.
And then, and yet just the practice of holding space, at some point, you drop off the cliff and you are in an altered state. And sometimes you don't even realize how you got there. It just happens.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this sort of showing up to the ritual of it that it's like it almost takes out the thinking. You just have to keep stripping the layers back and stripping the layers back. And I see that when I see words on a page, and I'll start somewhere, and it's usually coming from my thinking brain of I want to write about the thing. and then I'll just keep putting thoughts down. They're not necessarily in an order. They're just things that are kind of coming through. And then there's this don't need that. Don't need that. What's really wanting to be said here?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful way to actually connect with the higher mind, the higher voice, the inner self, whatever wording you relate to, but that higher, the intelligent, creative part of us. Yeah. Poetry, because it doesn't hold, a form will come through at the end. That's its own form. But it's you have to let go of the form before you get there. You have to release the form. You put all these words on a page, and then you have to detach from them, because if they want to come into what they want to come into, you have to watch them move all around and fade away, fade out, and fade in before they land. And so there's the usage of form to just get enough content in a place. And then the dissemination of form, that's not the dissolution of form, I guess the dissolution.
I'm really feeling the movement of your creative process. It feels so alive. And what I'm hearing is your entry point into the creative space first is really just to allow everything to land on the page. You're bringing a lot of form to the page, maybe a lot of words, and you're allowing them to shift and rearrange. And is that true? Do you find that your access point is first just to let everything out?
Sometimes, and sometimes not. I mean, I think that's the beauty of when you start to see your life as poetry, you're sometimes the poem shows up like this, and sometimes it shows up like that.
Yeah.
If I'm being intentional, I'm I'm wanting to write new content for something, that would be my approach. But the preferred way, is when I'm just walking along, or, doing the dishes, or in the shower, or in the bath, and something just pops in, or driving. Driving's a great place for those pop-ins. And I just hear a phrase. I'll just hear a phrase. And if I'm prepared, I write it down before it slips away again, because they do. Or it comes through a dream, or it comes through something visually. I see a connection between, I see a metaphor presents itself through imagery of some kind. And then that becomes my starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it stays or goes, usually it stays, but it's like, now we're just giving you the entry, and then you've got to now work backwards from there. Whereas sometimes I start with all the other stuff and then find that entry. The entry comes at the end, and sometimes it comes at the beginning. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I imagine that for listeners who don't have a creative practice or are not familiar with writing, who would say something like, gosh, I wish I could write something like that, probably the most approachable way for them to enter into that creative space would be to simply enter with a lot of material and just letting things stream out on the page. Whereas someone who has maybe cultivated that skill a bit more may begin to experience what I'm hearing you describe as like a living conversation with the muse, like letting the muse come into you, or feeling like you're listening for something to emerge through you.
Mm-hmm. One of there's a little trick I do when I work with somebody, and sometimes when I work with myself, but often when you're writing a piece, it's so easy and natural for the linear brain to want to get in and tell the story, from a more linear perspective, start, middle, end. And so, I'll often ask somebody to just, okay, here are the pieces, you've put them together in sort of a form that, the first form that comes out. And then I'll say, now read that back to me backwards to forwards.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, it absolutely tells the story still. But there's a natural, it just like pulls the heart of it forward. And it's like, because you're doing a reverse, you're pulling an opposite on yourself, especially when you don't expect to. It works when you don't expect this, know.
I love that.
Then you start to see like, oh, I can look at this in a completely different way. Sometimes the poem just reverse it and it's the poem. Like that's actually the nugget, But it's this practice of like turning your perspective around and around and around. Whenever, like I'm feeling stuck, it's like, have you tried putting the center of the piece at the top, or the bottom at the top, or the top at the bottom, and just absolutely mess with your order. And in doing so, it helps get you out of that, the control mind, the mind that wants to control the outcome of something and make it's got to be perfect. The perfection often comes through the surprise.
I love it. Brilliant.
I mean, because otherwise it's like, it's just so easy to find we find where we're stuck really easily, but that's the nugget. It's like wherever we come to that obstacle is like, okay, that's great. Because that's where your opening is, right? That's where the opening is. It's almost like, you want to find those obstacles because they have so much information in them.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were working on a piece and I'm in a good flow, and then all of a sudden I get to a narrow curve in the road, and I want to get to that next section of the story or get to the finish, and I'm stuck. You would say that stuck point is actually an access point.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Because I can imagine there would be a part of me that would want to maybe skip over that or get to the next thing, or it's frustrating and it's breaking my flow and it's interrupting
Yes.
my process.
Yeah.
How do you reframe that?
Well, when it really became clear to me that is such a built-in part of the process is when I started to paint. And this was just years ago. It was just for myself, just playing with paint. And it was not something I was comfortable with. It wasn't, language is more my comfort zone, or has become my comfort zone. Whereas paint always in the back of my mind was like that's where I had that voice that says, oh, you're such a good painter. I wish I could paint. That's where that comes through for me. So I'm like, well, then let's address that. So anyway, when I was in the painting process, that's when I saw it show up really clearly, because it wasn't the medium that I work with all the time. So it felt more obvious to me. And so painting, it's going well, feels good. And then suddenly I've done something and I've like kind of destroyed my progress. Like it's now gone from like flowing and good colors to like bad colors. And I made a mark and it changed the whole thing. And and now like, oh God, the whole sky is falling. And I'm all the inner critic just like rises and the sky falls and and the beratement begins and the sweat of it begins and the wanting to just destroy it and throw it away. And I'm not good. And what I came to find is like, okay, now this is the place. Like, what happens? Okay, I could destroy it, or what happens if I stay with it? What happens if I stay with it? And at this juncture, because I'm kind of letting it go anyway, in my mind, I'm ready to just trash it. So why not just stay with it? And this is really the place where I invite help, basically.
Oh.
Like the invisible powers that be. Help and trust. It's really help me trust. Help me trust. Help me trust that if I open space for it, if I allow space for it, I can actually be assisted in this moment. And the thing that is beyond my working mind around how something comes to be or should be, it overrides that. It's like, okay, now be willing to like really actively disassemble what you've got. Like throw white everywhere, disappear a whole section of it, and then see and inevitably, that's when something comes forward that's like, oh my God, I'm so relieved. I wasn't, the attachment to like, oh, it was just right. It was just right. And then I made it wrong. And now it's just wrong and staying in the wrongness. And then like go further into the wrongness. Be wrong about it. Be extra wrong. Because there's freedom in that, like that's where the freedom is. It's like, yeah, take it apart, let it go, bring the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom and be radical in this moment. Be absurd. like be the teenager self that you didn't, get to be fully. Be rebellious.
Yeah. So powerfully articulated. And I'm also hearing your phrase echoing back, life is poetry. And I also can't help but to feel the embrace of death and grief and surrender in that as well. Like there's the overthrow, there's the overturning, and there's also really such a deep surrender and in letting something actually fully release too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so there's the point of surrender in any artistic practice, in any creative practice, as I see it, as I've experienced it.
Me too.
There's there's the form that you start with, and then there's the release of that form, coming back to the form and the formless, and the surrender, and the willingness to lean into something bigger than ourselves, bigger than our egoic mind, the attachment mind, bigger than the identity mind, because so often that obstacle is really about our identifying with what we're creating. It's like, and that's where the judgment comes in, is we identify with, is it good? Is it bad? Am I good? Am I bad? How will people see me? How will people judge me? How do I judge myself? And then the practice of releasing that judgment and stepping outside of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's an interesting combination of energies to me, because in a way we need that agenda. We need a certain amount of momentum to get us into the process. We need ourselves, the content of our stories. There's a certain amount of presence that we arrive with in order to participate in this living conversation with the process and with the muse. And then I love how you're describing there's a tipping point where if we're too far in that sphere, then here comes the inner critic, and here comes the control and the rigidity that inevitably collapses the creative process. I imagine everyone listening has experienced moments like that, either as an artist or just in life. And I wonder how you navigate moments like that when you can just tell, oh, I'm gripping this thing. I'm holding on. How do you navigate the transition back toward receptivity and surrender?
Yeah, I guess that's where art and life really meet, isn't it? That's what I find is like, where art helps life and life helps art, that's where they intersect. It's a really interesting question, because it's almost like asking, how do you write? How do you make art? Show me how to do it. And usually the first thing that comes to mind is like, I don't know how to show you how to do it.
Yeah.
I don't even know how I do it.
Yeah.
Even though I'm attempting to articulate that now, there's part of me that's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
How do I come back from a hard moment, an obstacle moment, a moment of attachment and resistance? Like usually there's resistance to something. And if I can remember to use that as an entrance, like, what am I resisting? Is it something more expansive? Is it a darker place that I don't want to go to? Am I resisting the shadow? Am I resisting the light? But usually there's like this tension of, I don't want to fold right now because I don't want to go deeper. And I'm not ready to go like bigger or lighter or more expansive. I go through a process. I mean, I'll give you an example of before my daughter was leaving for college, like the summer before. I found that I was having excruciating back pain, which is recurring for me. But this was one of those moments where it was just like spasming, and I'm just like, my body is just bent over practically. I can hardly walk. I'm just not functioning well at all. And it's ongoing. It was lasting for weeks.
Damn.
And there was, in the old days, I used to go to chiropractor and kind of get the Band-Aid and do the thing, but I didn't really want intervention because part of me knows that something in me is speaking very loudly. And until I figure out what that is, it's not really gonna, even if I get a temporary resolution, help, support, it'll probably go back. So I start looking at back. What's in my back? What am I holding back? What am I afraid? In what way am I afraid to go forward? And finally, I put these pieces together and I saw that the idea of my daughter going off to school, going across the country was so much more epic for me than I was yet willing to really be with. And there was fear and there was a dissolution of the relationship in its present time form at that time. And I was wanting to hold her back, hold myself, hold the relationship back. There's all this stuff around holding back. And this is a big forward moment. It's a huge forward moment for both of us in our journey. And so as soon as I found that entry point, the holding back, and then I could talk to myself and start to coax myself forward and give myself the language that I needed to support to name those scary feelings, to name the unknowns, and allow it to be okay, but just bring it into a space of honoring, put those pieces on the table where I can see them clearly and really be in conversation with them in front of me instead of behind me, where I'm hiding them, kind of not wanting to see.
You're describing so much in such a beautiful vignette. It's such a powerful story that perfectly illustrates that, taking the painful thing, taking the hard thing, the resistance, and really turning toward it and bringing it to the center. What really strikes me about the way you shared your process of moving through that difficult time is the lens through which you began to see the back pain. And I can't help but to feel that just the symbolic nature of the way you're looking, the way you're seeing, the way you're listening. And I wonder if you could say more about that.
This is when magic comes off the page as a concept and becomes really integrated into our lives, is when we really do start working symbolically. For me, that's one gateway, is honoring the symbols, not dismissing them, really honoring everything that sort of leaps in front of your path. Everything, that's, you can tell the difference. You're something just unusual happens. Don't dismiss it. This is an opportunity to work with it. Activate the magic of whatever that is and whatever message it has for you.
Yes.
It happens all the time, daily. And sometimes I'll even, if something is I hear myself repeating a word a lot, or I hear myself wrestling, I can feel myself wrestling with something, or something just it feels like it's in the unknown tank and I don't really know how to bring it out of the unknown. And, I'll often find a word and I'll actually look up the etymology of it. I take it apart,
Okay.
and I look for roots. I guess I'm constantly looking for roots.
I love that.
And there's almost always, or I just look at whatever metaphor makes sense to me in whatever the thing is. And then I find information in it. That I can then use, that I can put into practice and use and be okay, now how do I apply that to where my resistance is, or where my inquiry is, or my sense of defeat, or whatever it is that comes through.
When we begin to look at the symbolic nature of reality, it's almost as though the dimension of life opens up and an object is no longer a thing, but a being that's alive and ready to have a relationship with us. And the more we look through the lens of symbolism, it's as though the animate nature of life awakens, and suddenly we're immersed in a whole new game. And one of the things I was struck by recently was a post that you wrote in your Substack where you were bringing forth a very powerful symbol of snake, a powerful story that then lent itself to some very poignant synchronicities. And I wonder if you could take us all on a quick tour through an excerpt of that piece.
Yeah, sure. So this was a piece I wrote in honor of death and grief, basically was the theme here. And Morning Snake. Shortly after Dad passed, I was given a dream of a long snake moving through tall grass. It came into view as quickly as it left, and left me with the feeling I should follow it. It was called Morning Snake, Mourning. My pursuit of said snake continued in the waking realm. I sought evidence of its name and found one reference. Coined in the Victorian era, a time when snake iconography was incorporated into jewelry for the bereaved, the morning snake was a symbol of eternal life and a talisman of grief worn in full view. Snake and its association with the life-death-life cycle is universal, but until the dream, I hadn't considered serpents had such purchase amongst the upper crust of grieving Victorians. It made me want snake jewelry. As death would have it, a couple days later, a friend invited me to her jewelry making studio. She offered to help me forge a symbolic adornment to honor my dad. It was a happy surprise. I hadn't told her about my dream or my dream-fueled obsession with finding the just right snake bling. What could be more just right than to create for oneself the solace that one seeks? The God universe was speaking. Your dreams are coming true. Come work the medicine. As I was writing this post, I was like even more opened up, of course. But I was thinking how just in the act of going to the studio and hammering out a piece of metal and, cutting it to size and hammering it out and etching, doing the etchings and like burning these etchings into metal and then rolling the ring and polishing it up. And I didn't really get into that in the post, but I got into it in my mind. And that was like, just that alone, it's like you can bypass that moment altogether, but you're actually being given, like the snake comes to life from the dream.
Yes.
And then you're in this workshop and you're being taken through the steps of the process of, to me, how I translate it now, of grief. Like what's ahead is this forging of the snake comes into your realm and then assists you, and also asks you to do the work of entering the medicine itself, which includes hammering and etching and blackening even before you polish, you blacken, you create this patina on the jewelry, and then you polish it after it's blackened.
Interesting.
So it's like you could apply that to just the whole journey of like how we're worked and we're worked and we're worked, and how grief can then, turn into a favor for us, instead of just like, oh, I'm grieving, it's so sad, and maybe I'll never stop grieving. But to see it as a process that's actually, there's a teacher inside of it. The snake lives inside of the experience of grief, which is through my lens at this stage, it's a process of activation. It's a practice of opening and staying fluid and staying open. And that might mean tears come, and that might mean anger comes, and lethargy comes, and all these things that come with moving emotion out of our body and through our body and staying fluid. And when one big grief strikes, it often activates all the smaller griefs that we sort of blaze through day to day, these accumulative griefs.
Yes.
And then we have a big one that kind of cracks it open, cracks the whole egg. And so then we're not just feeling the grief in the moment, but we're feeling the whole body of griefs that we have stored inside ourselves that need to come through.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about, when the big grief comes, when the tremendous loss strikes, and we're really brought to our knees in life and stopped in our tracks. It's so overwhelming. All we can do is truly this is very different from, I'm stuck on that line of poetry and I need to massage it and flip the canvas. When it happens at this scale and we need to flip our lives and everything is churning and churning, it's such an intensive process and commands surrender. But I love what you're touching on, which is how, like snake, it brings our belly to the earth and it brings us back down in touch with and becoming more intimate with all of the grief that has accumulated, which then can open the way to our aliveness and our intimacy. And I wonder if there's anything that you have discovered in your alchemical grief cauldron that speaks to that cracking open to life.
The more I walked through the gates of grief, I guess what it does is it there's less and less room for anything that's not essential. Speaking of poetry, it really strips you back to the basics.
Yeah.
So I watched myself go through that process, and it was a long process. It wasn't short. I kept wanting it to be done. I'm like, I should be done by now. I think I'm done. I'm probably done. And then it was like, no, not on your time.
Right.
On our time. We'll let you know when you're done, if ever. But, with this chapter of it, at least, I would say coming out the other side of that, there's even more a willingness to tell the truth and just be really, truly me. And I would say that includes if I leaned into a caricature of myself before, I'm leaning now into what the caricature was protecting.
Do you feel that was like a carving out of self that opened that authenticity? Was it a rupture and a heartbreak that cracked open something to emerge? Did it feel like something that was piercing into, or something that was rising out of, or both?
Yeah, I would say it's something that rises out of, but something external. It certainly feels external when you're pierced, when you're sort of like split by something, an event, a loss of some kind, interaction. But, for me at this moment in my life, loss has been profound. It's been powerful, and it's like we first go through looking at the loss as it presents to us out there, what we're losing out there, people, places, homes, work, whatever. And then we start to see that that's also operating, and mostly operating inside of ourselves. What are we losing? What are we having to let go of? What crust has to come off to really show up as the pure spring-fed pond that we are? It's not that this wasn't there and operating in conjunction before, but it was being protected, largely protected. And so I would say, like, in terms of taking up, it's like you can take up space with your like antics, but can you take up space with your spirit? And I think I leaned into antics, which were fine. They were fun, in general, like that's fun. It was entertainment, it was performance. It was bringing people together and creating energy, and it all serves a purpose. Like, I'm grateful for it. I love it. I love that happened in the way it happened. And I'm so grateful. It's like such a relief.
Yeah, it's so beautifully expressed. And I feel like what that creates is such an intimacy. There's so much more contact that can be made here when persona softens and is still included, but maybe just more peripherally, and ego is settled down a bit more, and we're really landing in our own bones and occupying ourselves, and feeling true to size, and true to form, and the authenticity that I feel like grief requires. I mean, there's no faking our way, but I do know that in a culture where grief is not familiar or always welcome, so many struggle to find their way into that surrender space, to embrace the intensity of being taken by that current. And I imagine many people will feel inspired hearing the way that you allowed yourself to take your time with that process and be guided by that process. And I wonder if there's any way that the writing was supportive to you as a way to maneuver that intensity.
Writing has been supportive to many intensities through my life, for sure. It's why I started writing. In this moment in time, I actually found that I kind of put the writing away for a long period of time. It's like it was interesting to not lean into that as a support as much.
Okay.
And then choose to come back to it. When I'd kind of come out the other end, it was like, now it's almost like the writing had to be burned up in the process as well.
Interesting.
So we went down together. Because it's my mode of expression. It's one of my primary modes of expression. And so in the disintegration process, it's like, okay, you're coming too, like all the tools that I've worked with and relied on, or used as a crutch, or used as a identifier. They all went in the pit.
Interesting.
And we all get cremated together.
Yeah. I find it really interesting that in the threshold of so much intensity, that I'll say hard-won modality, that skill
Mm-hmm.
set and medium that you had cultivated over so many years that was that familiar go-to, then maybe not fell away, but became less relevant to the current process. And I'm curious, um, what did you turn to through that deep surrender phase of your life?
Well, the woods. Yeah. Nature became my palette, and just a deep aloneness. I really needed alone. I needed a lot of alone, a lot of quiet. Um, I I deliberately moved from a very sort of social chapter of life to very not
Yeah.
overall.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so silence, a lot of quiet, gardening, real visceral. Like I needed my hands on the earth a lot.
Yeah.
And I needed to just figure my way through that. Cooking, like, of course, there was the whole COVID period that was part of my grief time, was in that bubble. So there was very like, you're in the kitchen more, you're in the garden more. That was naturally like a part of the story. But those really served as really grounding. I just needed a lot of grounding. And I needed to have the 3-dimensional, to put your hands on the dirt and help something to grow, facilitate growth and life in the midst of everything falling away, was a real beautiful counterbalance to what I was experiencing inside. So it was like, okay, there's the power of life is still here, and it's accessible and it's available to me, and I'm in interaction with it. And I start talking to the plants in ways that I never talked to them before, and the rocks, of course. And then that was like capped with a period of time where I was, I moved to a house that was really deep in the woods. And that was just a little over a year, but I'm still in the woods-ish, but this was a very special place. It was very Baba Yaga house. It kind of like came alive. It was very alive.
Love it.
And that was where I like had absolute like alone time and just forest time, and really got to, understand the rhythm of nature from the inside out, just being with it a lot, saturation, full saturation. And it opened up and showed me more and more and more. And so then, then I was able to come back to the words, but it's like I had to let the words go. I had to let the words go.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I think of the creative process as really being a circuit and a conduit and a channel, and you're very much actively engaged when you're in the creative process, and then setting all of that down to be immersed in nature. Something else happens where we're really allowing ourselves to slow down and just simply open to receptivity and be held by creation. And I think so many of us have been so swept up in our rushing and our bustling. And there's a sense of safety in that because it's so familiar to us. And I think so many would hear of a lot of time in the woods, a lot of time deep in nature, and maybe even feel a bit spooked. And I wonder, what was it in you that helped you to give yourself to that slowing down process and coming back to those rhythms and quiet?
I think what came present was the need for a lot of space, and that was internal space, and the reflection of external space was supportive of learning how to give more space to the insides that needed to rest, that needed to integrate, that needed to the nervous system that was in a state of like a hyperadrenalized state for so many years, going through a lot of sort of sudden shocking changes and movements and loss. Somebody actually said to me once, she was pretty intuitive, and she just like locked eyes with me, and she was just kind of catching up with me after a while. She said, "It seems like you just need a lot of space."
Mm.
And so that, speaking of words that kind of keep humming and they kind of keep massaging through your system, and they open up layer at a time,
Yeah.
like they're multifold, but we get what we can handle as we can handle it. And that started to become evident, like, yeah, I need space. Yeah. I filled my life so much, and then a lot of shit happened, and like, I just need space.
Yeah.
It's all I could think of as a way to heal. And that's a total slowing down. Like, and you think you're slow, and you think you've gotten really slow, and then you can go slower and do even less. And what I discovered in the space was a heightened relationship to my intuition. I got to let that was one of the things I got to take out of the cupboard and really start to interact with in a conscious, deliberate way. Because I find that intuition likes a lot of space. It likes you to be slow, to go slow if you're moving too fast, to take time. You have to be able to listen. And that's the piece that I was sort of skipping over a lot before this period, was the listening part. And so learning how to listen in a different way,
It makes me not want to say anything at all. The art of listening is not something that is shown to us in our culture. It's not something that's modeled or valued, nor is this spaciousness that you've really claimed at this phase of your life. And I know so many people struggle with keeping up with the pacing of their daily lives. And before you had the opportunity to go deep into the woods, into Baba Yaga's hut, I know that you too were busy raising a child on your own and finding your own way through this culture. And I wonder what you might invite people to consider or practice or adopt as ways to fold in this art of listening and attunement in the mix of their busy lives.
Yeah. I leaned really hard into nature, even when it wasn't an immersive time for me, even when I was in my busy years. I just found that it was like food. It was more important to me than food at that time. It was literally like, even if it was like the sanity juice, like put the IV in, and that was what got me through a lot of stress and a lot of intensity, a lot of demand. And even if it was for an hour. And what I found is that I needed it to be alone. I rarely would allow somebody to join me in that space. Walking with other people isn't my favorite sport. I do it once in a while, but I there's so much more. Like that time to me is so precious. Yeah. It's not hiking. Mm-hmm. That's a big distinction for me is, people like to do their weekend activities and go on their hikes and stuff. And for me, it's like, no, actually, I don't like hiking. Mm-hmm. I need to wander. Mm. It's an active practice of listening when I go into the woods. It's not fast, rarely fast. Mm-hmm. It's different than exercise. Yeah. It really is an active listening space. Mm-hmm. I think what's happened since then with more space is that it's not as isolated to just time in the forest or time in the bush. It's a little bit more integrated at all times is what that's given. This part of my life has given me is how to kind of integrate that, pace it through like the day, through the week, through the year. Whereas busy time of life, it was a reset. It was like, okay, it's like morning meditation or morning yoga, people like anything that you practice. For me, that was my practice in listening. Mm-hmm. And that's where the art would come through. And I would say now it's also where the art comes through, but it's even broader than that now. It's not just listening for art, but listening for life, listening for pace, listening for when to start and when to stop, when to shift gears. And it's amazing what actually comes through that space, the more you give to it, really wild and mystical things start to occur. Unexplainable things start to occur. Unexplainable through the lens of the culture we live in and we have been adapted to.
Yeah, in the recent Substack post that you just read from, the symbol of snake emerges through dream, and then you bring it into your craft. You're working with it through the jewelry into form, and then you bring it into another mode of craft through the writing. Mm-hmm. And as you're working the writing, another synchronicity happens. Can you tell us?
Yeah, so I was working on the Substack. This particular post took a long time. Speaking of pacing, I really did not write it all at once. I wrote it a little tiny bit at a time over a few weeks. I gave myself time with this one. Mm-hmm. I wrote a ton of material and discarded most of it to get there.
Interesting.
So it was a real labor, not emotional labor. It's more process labor for me, this particular one, but it was an important one because it was sort of, the cherry on the fudge sundae, of this moment in my life, kind of marking the moment and this passage that I've been through. So I was invested and it was sort of consuming whether I was in process or not. And it was about a day before I completed this post and I was outside and, noticed right at my doorstep, basically, a huge shed from a snake. And it must have just happened. It must have just happened like in the night or something.
Amazing.
And it was like right under the steps up to the door and coming out. And
at your front door.
At the front door, as I'm actively writing about the snake, like literally all over my life, like everywhere.
Yeah.
Through, having to like really go into these memories and through this post, the symbolism, and here's this snake shed.
I love this story, and it's such an inspiration to me because I feel like so many of us hesitate to push off the shore of our doing and rest back into our being, because there are such immense pressures, and we do feel a need to engage modern society in order to survive. And there's a risk that happens if we slow down. Will we still be able to keep up and keep our life moving forward? But this story is so powerful, because here you have slowed your pace way down, cultivated this piece of writing for weeks, and really cultivated the embodiment of the concepts over years. And you're steadily allowing the piece to be conjured and to emerge in its own pace and time. And when you slow down and allow the space for life to take its own form in its own way and time, something else enters into the conversation that could have never been there otherwise.
Yes. Yes. And this is the magic of it. This is where those poems come right off the page. They come ripping off the page.
Yes.
And that's, like, to an earlier point that I'm not sure if I completed or not, but it was like, people would ask me about poetry. Why do you do poetry? Blah, blah, blah. Kind of like heady questions about poetry. And I'm like, I just want poetry to come alive for people. I want it to come off the page is what, like, was always my go-to. It's like, I just want it to feel alive. It's not really about the words. It's about the living being that wants to come out of it and emerge at our doorstep in the form of, and even the form of a shed, which is like, that's the next stage of, it started with a snake that's a green grass, like spring snake slithering through the grass. And it's like, has the tail and the head finally met, in the form of the shed? And now we are releasing in the form of like this grief that's just like, you're actually now sharing it. You're sharing the story of it. And now you can, because you've gone through the full cycle of this particular cycle of death and grief. And it's like that snake came to say, hi, well done. And it's, you're on track.
Yeah. And your relationship becomes so prominent there. I mean, you can really see where the symbol first has emerged and shown itself to you. And then through your relationship in staying connected to that symbol through dream, through craft, through awareness, just incubating that symbol, keeping it alive, the synchronicities keep weaving themselves, and the relationship evolves as any relationship would.
Yeah, absolutely. And it happens across the board with so many things that now it's like, of course, that thing would show up in that exact moment,
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like if it didn't, it would be kind of weird now.
Yeah.
And I'm still in awe of it. As much as it shows up, I'm always in awe. And also like, yeah, of course, a little smug and a little bit totally like enchanted as well.
Enchanted.
But it's like, because I do, I've devoted myself to this. I've devoted myself. And it's a weird and hard thing to do. It's a strange path.
It is. Like grief, it's very nonlinear, and and like grief, it's certainly not central to the culture.
Yeah.
For so many listening who don't have this familiarity, or these happenstance confirmations from spirit through synchronicities and animal encounters, I wonder, how would you invite people to grow this space, to awaken the poet in themselves and try on the symbolic lens as they're finding their way through their daily lives?
I think it might start with noticing. I love the word noticing because it's just so simple and gentle. And it doesn't ask anything of you. Because I think sometimes when we want to open a door into another realm or have a certain experience, we put pressure on ourselves to have those experiences or kind of leapfrog into it.
Right.
And or compare ourselves to other people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Getting as basic as just noticing is its own practice. Whether that's where your feelings live or where they hide, which could be more complex, or like how the light catches the crevices of a rock at one time of day versus another, and what shows up in the face of that rock or the tree. Or I got a flat tire, like, and like, it seems so mundane and like inconvenient and troublesome. And it's like, when I get a flat tire, I always turn it back on. Tired. Am I tired? Am I burnt out? Like, what am I not honoring in myself that feels really tired right now? It's so tired. It has to manifest externally to try to get the message through. Like, take a beat, honor your tiredness. Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it is. Like, there's something tired that needs your attention, that needs rest, and needs repair, needs some repair, so that the energy doesn't keep leaking out. The air doesn't keep leaking out. You need to patch it or replace it or whatever it is you need to do. So that's a really day-to-day example of how these things show up, and can still be, that mystical lens, that the synchronistic lens can still be applied. It applies to everything. There's no separation. Like, you don't have to go live in the woods to have these experiences. It's really a lovely luxury when you can. I recommend it, but it doesn't, it's everywhere. It's all the time, because our spirit and essence is everywhere all the time. We carry it with us. And so what feeds and mirrors from our essence is all around: city, country, train, bus, plane, work, kids, all of it.
In your noticing, you're also inviting us to see no separation between external and internal as well.
Yeah.
It's like we're looking through the lens of the heart into the heart of the world, which reflects back into our own heart.
Yeah. And so it's just like anytime something is just a little out of the ordinary, a little unusual, something that, like a flat tire, like, oh, that doesn't happen every day. That happens once in a great while, but it happened. These odd things that happen, that occur in our lives that feel like out of our power or out of control, or why did this happen to me? Or a beautiful, like, you were having a thought about somebody and a hawk flies by or something, it could be that too. So it's just tracking those things. And the more we track them and give them a beat, and then the next time give them 2 or 3 beats, and maybe the next time look it up at night before you go to sleep. Like, what does this mean? Find that symbolic reference that might give you a little bit more information.
I love it. The poet Mary Oliver said something to the effect of, attention without feeling is just a report. And, attention is the first step to devotion. And I love the way you're framing this noticing, because it's really, it's calling us into not just observation mode to make a report or analysis, but really into a conversation, into a relationship.
Yeah. It's just, I think of it as circling. I do the same thing when I start to write. I circle it. But anything that comes into my awareness that's kind of has a little extra pick me,
Uh-huh.
it's like, okay, well, I don't really know what you mean, or I can't, I don't always translate things right away. Sometimes it takes weeks or years to come back to it.
Yes.
And sometimes it's in the moment. But this art of circling around and just looking at it from different sides, letting it rest, coming back to it, seeing where it might show up again in other ways. If we wanted to, if we ask it to speak to us, it will find ways to speak to us. Through our dreams, through conversation. Somebody mentions something that's related suddenly. Through a movie, something happens in a TV show, or it's like if you pause when sun slips behind a winter cloud, or laugh at the rope you swore was a snake. If your heart leaps and your stomach falls for any reason whatsoever, or no reason, then you are a poet.
So beautiful. I love it. And I'm so grateful for this conversation as an invitation for so many to enter into their own path of discovery and listening and kinship. I wonder if you have any closing wishes or offerings, invitations, recommendations for people as they step onto that path for themselves.
I think sometimes some people might consider this kind of work as extracurricular, or that's nice, when you go away to a workshop or have the time or space for it. My invitation would be that when we practice incorporating this day to day and letting it guide us from the inside out, it becomes way more than like, oh, that was so cool and enchanting that snake showed up, or, like that synchronicity happened, like neat. It's a way of reclaiming our power and being a participant in our life and how our life unfolds, and how we move from being like a victim, or a like feeling like things just happen to me and that's just life and whatever, we're just getting through it, to this, when you learn to extract the message of every moment that feels like there's an obstacle in the road, when you come to the boulder in the path and you're able to talk to it and ask it what it wants to show or share or reflect back to us, not only does it move out of the way, it's like we begin to learn how we can actually work with these things. When you can have a conversation with these mystifying pieces or these seemingly impossible pieces, and actually be in conversation with it, you start like transforming your experience of everything, of how you walk through the world, of how you interact with others, of how you see yourself, and how you actually do have the power to shift things. Because when you name the thing in the room and you really are asking to receive the message and the essence of something, and you are taking enough time to listen and then actually receive it, yeah, you become a living part of the magic. You know, it's not just something that happens to you, it happens from you.
Wow.
And life just becomes more rich.
Yes.
Sometimes more challenging. You know, it's to face these pieces as it's a courageous thing to do.
It is.
And it's deepening and it's enlivening.
Yeah.
And it's resetting, and it just brings awareness to the sentience of all of it. It's all connected and living, breathing pulse. Like, these aren't separate things that happen. They're all interwoven. And then that comes back to how we're all interwoven and how we're interwoven with nature and each other. And if we understand how we are interwoven with ourselves.
So beautifully said. And I think it really is our nature to weave ourselves back into belonging in that way. And although we resist it or might feel overwhelmed by the emotions that come, you know, ultimately the richness that's to be gained, as you're describing, is so freaking worth it.
So worth it. So worth it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today and all of the wisdom and beauty that you've shared with us all.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you for the invitation. It's really lovely to be here and speak freely. Do you feel like you got the things you were hoping to get?
I feel like I got so much more than I could have expected to glean from our conversation. It's just such a gift to be in your presence and to feel the natural stream and flow that just comes through you. And I think it's such a testament to how when we do walk the long path of following, you know, the guidance and slowing ourselves so that we can attune to a deeper way, the wisdom becomes embodied. It nestles itself inside of us, and it's in our bones, and it's in our being, and then we just show up, and it keeps happening, and it happens through us. And it was such a gift to feel that in you today.
It's such a gift to feel it, because it's different. Like, I can feel the change. I really can. It's just like, I would have been so like concerned in the past about, am I prepared enough? Have I thought this through? Have I, you know, like maybe writing it all out and like make sure that I have like I remember what I would want to say. And it just was like, it feels so clear now. Like, you'll know what to say.
Yeah.
It's there. Like, trust. The trust thing is such a huge piece.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing about being scorched, you know, by fire, through loss, through hardship, and the harrowing journey, is that we do learn to trust ourselves, to know ourselves, and to trust life. That, like, no matter how intense and how fucking fucked, like, I'm still here, and look, I'm just gonna sit down right inside of this, and let's do it. Here we go. What do you got?
Do it. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
So
it's so cool to come out the other end, like, just to connect with you in this end of the snake tail. And, you know, because I certainly know that you have been through it too. And it's fun to know, like, just to have the memory of like our time during that time and who we were and how, and the evolution, and then all the space, and then to circle back and like Hey, how's it been going?
How was the underworld for you?
Underworld, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns out it changed me from the inside out. And
Yeah.
you too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're even more beautiful with all the soot in your hair, the ash on your brow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I imagine so many people are going to be so hungry to follow you and find you online and continue weaving their path with yours. So I wonder if there are ways that people can sync up with you virtually and find more of your writing and engage with you through your work.
Yeah. Yes, please come find me. If you feel inspired by our conversation and would like to join me for an expanded Spell in the Woods, consider subscribing to my weekly newsletter on Substack. I share poems, stories, photos, art, and lay bare my creative and intuitive process. You can also peruse my socials for added whimsy. If you are tuning your fork and ready to turn your own soil, and would like personal support decoding the wisdom and magic hiding at the center of your life, send me a message and enter divination sessions in the subject line. I look forward to connecting with you. Visit me at akkab.substack.com. That's akkab.substack.com. On Instagram, find me under the handles Spell in the Woods or Drunk Love Heart. You can email me at spellinthewoods@gmail.com.
Thanks for tuning in to The Dreaming Wild. Do you have a magical tale or episode idea? Go to thedreamingwild.com to leave a voicemail, get featured on the show, and join our patron community meetups. We've got an alchemical cauldron of inspiration brewing. You should definitely come check it out. Thank you so much for listening, sharing, and subscribing. It's your generosity that keeps the project alive. Sending so much love from my heart to yours. See you next time.